There we go. Right, I'm on 3 cameras today. So basically, I am expanding on today's daily tip. If you didn't get it yet, then it's basically about vitamin D supplementation. I'm encouraging anybody who currently supplements with vitamin D to make sure that you combine it with vitamin K2. So I'm going to come on to that. If you haven't seen that tip, don't worry, because I'm going to come back to that. But basically, it's kind of good. It's really dark and gloomy in here, which is kind of ideal because this is why we want to be taking vitamin D right now, because the majority of our vitamin D, well, certainly that our body can use, is actually coming from the sun. And of course, in winter time, we're not going to get that level of exposure. Even for most of us during the summer, you know, we spend our time indoors. Most of us are stuck in offices. So even in the summer, it can be difficult for people to get the level of vitamin D that we need. So winter is always a good time. And I'd say even towards the end of summer, actually, definitely autumn is when we want to start thinking about supplementing with vitamin D. Now, because vitamin D is fat soluble, that means that levels can accumulate in the body. And so that does run a risk of us building up excess or even toxic levels in the body. So we want to make sure that we don't do that because that's not safe for us. So one thing that I always recommend around vitamin D is to get yourself tested. Now, you can do this through the NHS. You could ask your GP, depending on what GP you have. They may not be so willing to do this unless they feel that there's a clinical reason to do that. And if you're concerned about using NHS resources, then you can do this privately, and it really isn't expensive. You can actually use one of the NHS labs, and I'll try and put a link below. It's literally just like a blood spot test. Sorry for anyone who's squeamish. So they send you a kit, you've got a lancet, you literally just prick your finger, and all they need is like a drop or a couple of drops of blood to be able to analyze it. So you send it back to them, and then they send you the results. So it's always a good idea, because then you get to see kind of where your starting levels at, because some of us will naturally have a higher need for vitamin D, and some of us genetically may have fairly inefficient vitamin D receptors. So even if we get in a lot, you know, we may not be using it so well in the body, basically. So always a good idea to get tested, because you may need higher than recommended supplements. Remember, a lot of these recommendations are based on the average person, and we're not all average, are we? Plus, a lot of the recommendations are often based on a very sort of subsistence level, you know, for you not to get sick rather than for you to have an optimal amount. So always good to get tested, and of course to protect yourself against excess levels. Now, some people will say that's very rare. I've had a client before who came in who she was taking quite a lot of supplements. You know, she was very clued up in terms of nutrition. So she was taking a lot of supplements, and of course I wanted to review them. One thing that I definitely wanted to do for her was to actually get tested for vitamin D, because previous testing for her had shown low levels, but she'd continued with a really high dose, and actually she did have excess levels, which can be dangerous. So we kind of, you know, got her off that, retested. So definitely that's something to consider if you're working with somebody. So if you're working with a nutritional therapist, they can guide you in terms of actually what amount of vitamin D you'll need to supplement with and for how long. And then, you know, it is a good idea to get retested. Like I said, testing, if you're getting it done privately, it's only about £30 or so. So it's not a lot, sort of between £30–40 or so. So, you know, it's affordable for most people. The reason why vitamin D is so important, it's not just to work with calcium for bone health, but it's really important for our heart health. It's important for our immune system too. So it actually helps to regulate our immune system, keeping things in balance, especially around autoimmunity. So if you have an autoimmune condition, definitely consider getting tested, because you might actually have a higher need for vitamin D than the average person. There's actually quite a lot of studies that show a link between low vitamin D levels and autoimmunity. So get yourself tested, especially if you have an AI condition, and go for vitamin D3. That's the best form of vitamin D to take. You can get vitamin D from foods such as oily fish, eggs, certain types of mushrooms, but that's in a vitamin D2 form usually. Vitamin D3 is what we take in from sun, and it's kind of the best way to supplement with that. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, what I mentioned this morning was about combining that vitamin D with vitamin K2. Reason for this is because the two vitamins, vitamin K2 is another fat-soluble vitamin, both of them work synergistically. So they kind of work as partners, really. And it's important. We don't know exactly what role the vitamin K2 plays in the immune system, but it does have an impact. And in terms of bone health, vitamin D helps calcium to deposit in the body, but vitamin K2 pretty much makes sure it goes to the right place. And this is important for heart health because we don't want our arteries to get calcified. We don't want the wrong things to get calcified. And again, this is the issue that you'll get if you supplement with too much vitamin D, and especially if you supplement with too much and you're not balancing it with the vitamin K2. Even, you know, just as a caveat, even if you are supplementing with both of them, you can still take excess levels of vitamin D. So testing important, especially if you're going to go for high dosages. Work with an NT. Nutritional therapists can help you to really sort of pinpoint the dose that you need. In terms of kind of the levels that you're looking at, I don't want to get super technical, but a lot of the testing that will come back, so I mentioned the NHS lab that does the testing, that will basically come back and tell you if you have sufficient or insufficient levels, which, yes, it's useful, but we want to be looking at optimal, because you want to be at optimal, fabulous health, right? So in terms of levels, if we're looking at nanograms per milliliter, and I'll try and pop this in comments. So I'm going to do this one at a time. Optimal levels. Well, actually, do you know what? I'll just put this in the context. You don't want to see me typing. So yeah, let me just, right. So optimal levels are between 50 and 80 nanograms per milliliter. And generally speaking, with the sort of typical NHS values, you'll get told that anything below 30 is, if it's below 30, it's insufficient. If it's above 30, it's sufficient. Bit of a gap between 30 and 50 in terms of sort of where we want to get to optimally. Anything above 100 nanograms, what is it with that word? Over 100 nanograms per milliliter, that's going to be excessive. So you need to ease off. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say about vitamin D. Really important also for mood disorders. There's been studies to link low levels of vitamin D to depression. Not sure on the exact mechanisms. I know there's some people who think that depression has an inflammatory element, but also, you know, it could be indirectly linked because low levels of vitamin D in the winter, that's when we tend to feel a little bit worse mentally. So yeah, if you are working with me as a client, of course, that is something that I can support you with, that vitamin D testing, and talking about those testing, you know, that it's for that reason that, you know, I also wanted to talk about the membership group, because that testing and interpretation is going to be something that I offer for members. So yeah, if you want to get involved with your weekly meal plans, workouts, etc., and get some interpretation on vitamin D testing, then go to ubyanthia.co.uk/together. So that's ubyanthia.co.uk/together. So I hope that answers any queries about vitamin D. I hope it expands a little bit more on what I was talking about earlier, and have a fabulous day. So hopefully I'm going to try and post those comments with those values that I talked about. And yeah, Have a fab day. I'll see you soon. I've got to switch off everything now. Right. Bye bye. Bye bye.